Hi John, hey Jaguars, this is Miss Schooler with Soof by Sarah Weeks. We are in chapter 4. More Than a Wheel Loves to Spin, that's what it's called. When we came back inside after recess, Lindsay was slumped down in her seat, crying. Mr. Taylor explained what had happened and asked the class if anyone had seen the missing charm. I folded my hands on top of my desk and didn't say a word. I had never kept a secret before, and I was surprised by the way it made me feel like a jar full of lightning bugs. Later that afternoon, when I got home, I went out to the garage and dug around in the recycling bin until I found an old metal Band-Aid box with a hinged top. After stuffing it full of cotton balls, 11 in all, I tucked the little silver bell inside and snapped the lid closed. I considered several hiding places before settling on one. I figured that because I made my own bed every morning and changed the sheets myself every other Sunday, no one would ever have a reason to look under my mattress. Lifting up one corner, I slid the box under, carefully smoothing the covers until when I was finished. I smiled to myself, enjoying this special sparkly feeling bubbling away inside me. By morning, the special feeling was gone, replaced by a twisted-up pretzel of guilt. Keeping something that doesn't belong to you isn't the same thing as keeping a secret. It's stealing. Not only that, but I had lied to Mr. Taylor, my favorite teacher in the whole world. I could hardly wait to get to school. As soon as the coast was clear, I dropped the silver bell on the floor near Lindsay's desk, where I was sure she would find it. As the knots in my stomach began to loosen, I crossed my heart and swore up and down I would never, ever keep anything that didn't belong to me again. It wasn't too long before I broke that promise. A few weeks later, during Easter vacation, my mother asked me to go check and see if the mail had delivered yet. Duck came along, trotting down the driveway beside me with his tongue hanging out on one side of his mouth. The little red flag on the side of the mailbox was up, and as I stepped out into the road to pull open the flap, I kicked up something hard with the tip of my shoe. At first I thought it was a stone or a rusty bolt that had come loose and fallen off a passing car. But it turned out to be a cigarette lighter, the old-fashioned metal kind, like the one my Uncle James used to light his pipe. Duck gave it a quick sniff, but he was far more interested in the grasshoppers that were jumping around in the tall weeds. Doggy Cheetos, I called them, because they were one of Duck's favorite snacks when he was lucky enough to catch one. Clearly the lighter had been there for a while. The outside was caked with dried mud. I turned it over and scraped the bottom with my fingernail, the way my father scratched off the numbers on the Quickie Chance lottery tickets he bought at the gas station sometimes. As the dirt flaked away, letters appeared. Z-I-P-P-O. Zippo. One time, when my Uncle James was visiting, I'd asked him to show me how his lighter worked. Uncle James lived in Sacramento and taught science in a private middle school for brainiac kids. We hardly ever got to see him. He looked exactly like my father, except that his hair was red instead of brown and his mustache was skinny. He put some special kind of wax on the ends to make them curl up. We were out in the backyard because my mother had told him he couldn't smoke in the house. He flipped open the lighter. Zip! Inside was a little metal wheel that he had to push down with his thumb to make a spark to light the wick. "Can I try?" I'd asked, reaching for the lighter. My mother saw us from the kitchen window and came running. "Have you lost your mind?" she'd yelled at Uncle James. "I was only showing her how it worked, Ruby," he explained. She was curious. "In case you haven't heard, curiosity killed the cat," my mother had said, snatching the lighter away from him and storming back into the house. "Wow," said Uncle James, shaking his head. "Your mom used to be so chill back in the day. Since when did she become such a worrywart?" "Since forever," I told him. Later that night, when my father had come into my room to say goodnight, I'd asked him why my mother worried so much. "That's one of the ways she shows her love," he'd said. "Like when Duck licks my face?" I'd asked. He smiled and kissed my forehead. "Yeah," he said, "only without the slobber." I wondered if the lighter I'd found in the grass worked the same way as Uncle James's had. I pried open the top with my fingers. Inside was the same type of notched wheel, only when I pushed down on it with my thumb, it didn't budge. I tried a few more times, but it was jammed tight. I didn't care if it was broken. I still thought it was cool. I wanted to keep it, but I knew there was no way on earth my parents would ever let me, especially not my mother. I wasn't even allowed to make popcorn in the microwave for fear that I might burn my fingers opening the bag. I turned the lighter over. It fit so perfectly in my palm, and I couldn't explain why, but there was something exciting about that word, Zippo. What if I didn't tell my parents about the lighter? After all, it didn't work, and there was no way I could return it to its rightful owner. It was probably some city person passing through, or someone who had chucked it out the window because it didn't work anymore. Why shouldn't I keep it if I wanted to? What harm could it do? "Finders, keepers, losers, weepers," I whispered, closing my fingers around the lighter as that lightning bug feeling came bubbling back up inside me. I had a real secret this time, one of my very own. I skipped up the driveway and hopped up the porch step backwards, just for the heck of it, tapping the railing 3 times before I went inside. "Anything interesting today?" my mother asked as I handed her the mail. "Blimey, your ladyship, see for yourself," I told her. "Look!" she exclaimed happily, holding up a pale yellow envelope. "It's a letter from Heidi." It had been almost 13 years since Heidi had traveled alone from Reno, Nevada to Liberty, New York, on the wings of a mysterious 4-letter word. After Heidi went home, she and my mother kept in touch, exchanging cards on major holidays and picture postcards if either of them went someplace interesting. At the bottom of each one, they would always write the same thing, Soof. "What does it mean?" I'd asked my mother one day when I was a little girl. She opened the flowery birthday card she'd bought for Heidi and uncapped her pen. Soof was Heidi's mama's special word for love, she explained. "Well, why did she need a special word?" I asked, reaching for the pen soon as my mother was finished writing, so I could color in the middle of those 2 beautiful little O's. "Because Heidi's mama was special," she said. "Am I special?" "Yes," she kicked the top of my head. "You are, but not in the same way." When my mother had worked as an aide at Hilltop Home, one of the people she'd helped take care of was Heidi's father, Elliot. Heidi's mother had lived at Hilltop for a little while too, but that was before my mother's time, so they'd never actually met. I'd never met any of them, but I'd seen pictures. Luckily, my mother was too busy fussing now over the new letter from Heidi to notice the small lump in the back pocket of my jeans. I left her in the kitchen and went to my room. After closing the door, I took out the lighter and polished it with the hem of my t-shirt until it gleamed like a jewel. I didn't have the Band-Aid box anymore, so instead I put the lighter inside a pink sock that had lost its mate and tucked it under the mattress for safekeeping. Over the next few days, I took it out every chance I got, practicing flipping open the top until I could do it in a single motion, the way Uncle James did. If my parents noticed that I was spending more time than usual alone in my room with my door closed, they didn't say anything about it. My father was busy at work, and my mother had other things on her mind, like washing the windows and polishing the silver. The reason Heidi had written was to say that she was coming to visit, and my mother wanted everything to be perfect. "Don't let me forget to get the jelly bean jar down from the attic before Heidi gets here," she told me. "She'll want to see that again, I'm sure." Heidi had won a free taxi ride by guessing the exact number of jelly beans in the jar when she'd first arrived in Liberty. There were 1,527 originally, but she'd eaten a few, so now there were only 1,521. I knew that because I'd poured them out on the table and counted them one day when I was bored. There were 422 reds, 392 oranges, 275 greens, 220 yellows, 114 blacks, and 98 pinks. While my mother was busy dusting and mopping and washing and waxing everything in sight, I was busy too, dripping oil onto the little wheel inside the lighter, trying to get it to move. But it was stuck as tight as ever. I even tried using coconut oil, but all that did was make it smell like a macaroon. After a while, my excitement about the lighter began to wear off, and the sparkly special feeling lost its fizz, like a bottle of soda gone flat. By the time school started up again, I had forgotten all about it. That is the end of chapter 4. One thing I've noticed, I don't know if you have as we're reading this, is that the author gives us some foretelling. Sometimes she says things that will come up and kind of gives you a little clue about what's going to happen later in the story. So see if you recognize any of that as we're reading. I'll see you next time.